Before watching the video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and watch the video till the end. You will love my video. We need your support. What if Canada became America's 51st? Imagine waking up one morning to breaking news. The Canadian flag is lowered, the stars and stripes rise above Ottawa, and the world watches in shock as the United States welcomes its newest and largest state. Canada has just become America's 51st state. What would this mean for politics, the economy, culture, and the entire global order? Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating what-if scenarios in history. What if Canada became America's 51st state? A shockwave through history. For over 150 years, Canada and the United States have lived side by side, sharing the longest undefended border in the world. They trade, they ally in wars, they vacation across each other's borders, but they've also fiercely maintained separate national identities. Canada defines itself partly by not being America. Universal health care, strict gun laws, French-speaking Quebec, and a reputation for politeness are seen as key differences. So if Canada suddenly joined the United States, it wouldn't just be a political merger, it would be the collision of two distinct cultures, histories, and systems. The ripple effects would stretch across every corner of the globe. Politics. The power shift. Let's start with politics. Size and representation. Canada's population in 2025 is roughly 40 million people. That's about the size of California, the most populous U.S. state. Overnight, America's population would jump to nearly 380 million people. In Congress, Canada would add dozens of new House seats. Imagine Ontario and British Columbia sending representatives to Washington, D.C. On top of that, Canada would get at least 2 senators, possibly more if its provinces were broken up into separate states like Texas once was. Party advantage. This raises the big question: which party would benefit? Canadians generally lean more liberal, especially in major cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. That could give Democrats a significant boost in elections. However, rural provinces like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba often vote conservative, more aligned with Republicans. The result? America's political landscape would tilt, but not in a simple, predictable way. Instead, the U.S. might experience even deeper polarization, as Canadian issues like healthcare and bilingualism crash into America's already heated debates. The economic earthquake. If Canada became part of the United States, the economy would transform overnight. Resources. Canada is a treasure chest of natural resources. Vast oil reserves in Alberta, timber and minerals across British Columbia, fresh water, supplies that rival any in the world. The Arctic frontier, rich in untapped energy. Potential. America, already a global economic giant, would suddenly dominate even more of the world's energy and raw materials markets. This could make the U.S. nearly invincible in terms of economic self-sufficiency. Trade simplified. Currently, Canada and the U.S. trade billions of dollars daily. If Canada were a U.S. state, those cross-border trade disputes, tariffs, and negotiations would vanish. The entire North American continent, excluding Mexico, would essentially become one unified economy, currency. But here's the shocker: the Canadian dollar would disappear. Everything would switch to U.S. dollars. For Canadians, this would be a huge adjustment. Prices would shift, wages would change, and some industries might collapse while others thrive. In the long run, Canadians would benefit from the global strength of the U.S. dollar, but the short-term disruption would be massive. Social and legal upheaval. Healthcare clash. One of the biggest battles would be over healthcare. Canadians are fiercely proud of their universal healthcare system, where hospital visits don't result in crushing bills. Joining the U.S. could put that system at risk. Would Canada's model influence America toward universal health care, or would Canadians be forced into America's private, profit-driven system? This could ignite one of the most passionate social debates in modern history. Guns and laws next. Gun laws. Canadians live under much stricter regulations than Americans. Suddenly, U.S. Second Amendment rights would apply. Many Canadians would resist this cultural shift, fearing a rise in gun violence, cultural identity. And then, there's the question of identity. Canadians pride themselves on being Canadian. Hockey, maple syrup, saying sorry, and cheering. For Team Canada in the Olympics, these aren't just stereotypes, they're markers of national pride. Would all of that vanish? Or would Canadians cling to their identity even harder inside a larger U.S. system? Quebec. The wild card, we can't talk about Canada without talking about Quebec. Quebec is unique. It's French-speaking, culturally distinct, and has flirted with independence for decades. If Canada joined the U.S., Quebec would likely resist. Fiercely. Would Quebec demand special status? Would it declare independence rather than join the Union? Could America realistically enforce English as the only national language? This is where the merger could crack apart. Quebec could become the flashpoint for secession movements and civil unrest. Military and global power. The U.S. already has the world's most powerful military. Adding Canada would supercharge that dominance. Arctic Control Canada controls a huge slice of the Arctic, a region growing in strategic importance as ice melts and new shipping routes open. With Canada in the Union, the U.S. would dominate the Arctic militarily and economically, outmaneuvering Russia and China. Canadian forces merge. The Canadian Armed Forces would merge with the U.S. military, adding bases, personnel, and strategic depth. Though smaller than the U.S. military, Canada's forces are highly skilled, especially in peacekeeping and cold weather operations, NATO, and global diplomacy. But here's the twist. The world would lose Canada as an independent diplomatic's voice. Canada is often seen as a neutral peacekeeper, a country that mediates and de-escalates conflicts. Without Canada, the world would have one less moderating influence and one more supersized America. Global reaction. The world would not watch silently. Russia would panic, seeing U.S. power expand right into the Arctic. China would view this as America tightening its grip on global dominance. Europe would mourn the loss of Canada's independent voice in NATO and the UN. Mexico might fear becoming the next target for annexation. This wouldn't just be a North American change, it would be a global shockwave, redrawing the balance of world power, everyday life. But let's bring it down to the personal level. What would life actually look like for every day? Canadians' taxes. U.S. tax laws would apply. Some Canadians might pay less, but others, especially the wealthy, could pay more. Healthcare bills. Canadians could face medical bills for the first time in their lives. Sports. The NHL would be entirely American. Team Canada would vanish. From the Olympics, Canadian athletes would compete under the U.S. flag. Holidays. Say goodbye to Canada Day. The 4th of July would replace it. Thanksgiving would move from October to November. Education. Canadian universities, often cheaper than U.S. ones, could face higher tuition rates under American systems. It would be a cultural earthquake. Possible outcomes. So what's the end game? The U.S. becomes unstoppable, dominating natural resources, global markets, and military power. With Canada as its 51st state, America's influence reaches heights never seen before in human history. The cultural and political clashes prove too much. Canadians resist assimilation, Quebec pushes for independence, and America struggles to govern such a vast and diverse land. Out of the merger, a new kind of America emerges, one that blends Canadian values of social welfare and diplomacy with American power and ambition. This hybrid identity could redefine what it means to be American. So, what if Canada became America's 51st state? It would be the biggest geopolitical event of the century. The U.S. would gain unmatched strength, but it might also inherit deep divisions and cultural conflicts. Canadians would face the loss of their national identity, while the world would adjust to a super America unlike anything we've ever seen before. In the end, the question isn't just what would happen, it's could it ever work? Could two nations with such different values, histories, and identities truly become one? That's a question history may never answer, but it's a scenario worth imagining. Closing line for video, so, what do you think? Would Canada thrive as America's 51st state, or would it be the beginning of chaos? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's biggest what-ifs.